Hello, listeners of the Mad Scientist Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Cogswell, here with my co-host, Marie Mayhew. Marie, how's it going?
It is going very well. How are you doing? What's going on? What's the story? What's the haps?
Doing pretty well. So, listeners, we got big news here. Jake, our editor, shaved the mustache.
What?
Yeah, which is crazy.
So now he doesn't look like the Unabomber picture. Is that it?
Yeah, so he's been fired. He's gone. He's gone. Mustache is a requirement for us on editors. No.
I was joking because the one picture I saw of him, and Jake, God love you, because I've never really seen pictures of you except on like social media. I'm like, oh look, it's Jake, and I'm like, what? Who is this hipster doofus? No, I'm joking. But he was like, he had a mustache, and it was very sort of ironic. And I think in the picture he might have even had the aviator sunglasses on.
Yeah, and the hoodie and the bomb under his arm.
And the hoodie.
So actually, I had a friend. He used to be one of my undergrad students in the lab. Actually, so did Jake. That's how me and Jake know each other. But so this guy Justin. So shout out to Justin, having a great time at the University of Minnesota. He came by and told me. So we had a couple people over last night. So he came by and he was like, I'm really enjoying the Unabomber series. Whatever. But he was telling me that when he was a freshman at Northeastern, I guess they had an art exhibit that was like famous typewriters throughout history.
Yeah.
And they had the Unabomber's typewriter.
We will get into that. There is a huge thing that I was researching and finding sort of on the aftermath of this whole thing. And I am both mystified and kind of sickened by the commercialization, by sort of this like, this fetishization. All right, Jake, roll the tape.
Fetishism. Roll the tape, Jake.
Welcome to the Mad Scientist Podcast. This week's episode, The Unabomber Part 4.
Fetishization?
Fetishism.
Making a fetish out of the Unabomber.
Making a fetish out of the Unabomber, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's very, it's very prevalent, too.
No, it is.
Yeah.
But what was cool...
It's scary, though. I mean,
a little
it's
bit.
scary because a part of me wants that typewriter, right? A part of me is like, oh, that's very cool. Like, wow, what,
Oh, it'd be super cool to have the typewriter or
his pencil, that he hand sharpened with a knife or some stuff like that, right? But it's also, this is a guy who is not worthy of your admiration.
But I don't know if it's necessarily admiration though. It's like having I don't know, it's like do you think it'd be cool to have like a painting that like John Wayne Gacy did? Like I think that'd be awesome. I think it'd be really cool to have that. It'd be scary. I think it's more the macabre nature of the article or the item, right? The fact that it's been linked to, but it is just fetishization, right? I mean,
yeah, I mean, there's no other reason to want a picture of a clown.
No,
unless
you're
into
crappy
that.
painting.
And if you're into that type of stuff, I'm not holding it against you. There's no judgment here. I'm just saying that, if it's creepy clowns, okay, creepy clowns plus serial killers, you're getting into a little bit of a different territory with that, I would say.
I hear you.
Yes.
All right. So listeners, obviously this is the last in the Unabomber series. So this one might run a little long just because we got a lot of ideas and thoughts on this, as you can already tell by our slight rambling there at the beginning, but it's going to be fun. It's going to be great.
Playful banter.
So this episode we have titled Getting Even, because this is really where we left Ted last episode. So he began off this kind of spree, getting even at the professors in the department in particular that he felt had slighted him when last episode Professor Sorry at Northwestern told him to go try and send that manuscript around and kind of see what professors thought of it over at the University of Chicago or the University of Illinois Chicago Circle campus. And when he came back, he was, if you remember, Sorry says literally kind of shaking with rage, and he said, "I'll get even." It's kind of his last quote. And then the last time we saw Ted, he was at a lecture series on gunpowder. which is a little on the nose, but kind of funny. So this,
he didn't waste any time.
He did not waste any time on getting even.
Any time with that, with learning about it. And it's like the beautiful thing about that too, in a lot of ways, is that, he didn't just read up on it. It's this student learning active. He attended a lecture on it.
So the Unabomber, the first bombing occurs at the Chicago. Well, okay. There's a pattern here that Ted uses on his bombs. First off, and we're going to get into this. We're going to get into all of this really kind of deeply here. But in general, Ted's bombs are all made out of primarily natural components. So in other words, he uses, obviously he has to use some electronic components. He didn't smelt his own copper down from mineral and then, turned it into the wire that he used or whatever. Nothing kind of that extreme. Because again, if you remember from the last episode, David was the one that really did kind of the frontiersman thing. Ted, lived alone in the woods, but he was just kind of living a weird hermit lifestyle. There was a town that he biked to all the time. He had people in town that knew him. He went to the store. He went to the library, right? The image that we have of him living alone in the woods is a little overblown. But anyways, all of his bombs were made out of primarily natural materials and then electronic components that he could buy in town. And that made them really hard to track back to anyone in particular because, he would use nails and screws that he either made himself out of wood in some instances, or any parts that he used, he was meticulous about removing serial numbers or any traceable kind of signatures or anything on them.
Which is amazing. I mean, he made his own glue too.
Yeah, it was.
Which out of anything that you could buy in bulk that would be hard to trace, it'd be glue.
Yeah, it's not.
I would think.
It's not they're made in these giant batches, right? So it's not like he could.
Yeah.
It's not like it's the easiest thing to find. He's not using some specific type of, paint or something. It's Elmer's glue,
right?
But
yeah, but
Elmer's
he decided,
wood glue.
Hey, we'll boil down hooves, right? Cow hooves, and made it himself, which is sort of a strange. Out of everything you're going to make yourself, like, man, that seems like your return on investment is a lot of work. But
yeah, he was a particular weirdo. He was a particular weirdo, right?
Very particular.
He had his little peculiarities. The first bomb itself was he will become better at making bombs as time goes on. And you're going to see that with the lethality of the bombs and also just the casualty list. So the first bombs are pretty standard kind of pressure bombs or kind of pipe bomb-esque sort of things. So he would have a wooden box around kind of the internals of the bomb itself. The bomb would use gunpowder and matchsticks for his charge, and then a lamp cord that carried the spark from the starter over to the ammunition. The way that a bomb works in general is you have something that is combustible that'll undergo a violent exothermal reaction. And when it creates that reaction, it'll also generate a lot of gases. And so the gases in a confined space will lead to an increase in pressure, which will eventually lead to the container itself exploding and then shooting things out as projectiles. And that is the real danger of the bomb. It's the projectiles and the shrapnel and things inside of the bomb itself. It is not the pressure wave or the heat necessarily that causes all the damage, especially with a bomb like this that's relatively small. The first bomb that he sent was to the Chicago Circle campus at the University of Illinois, and the return address on it was at Northwestern. The package, like a lot of his bombs would be, was left in a parking lot in the hopes that someone would find it and then forward it to the correct person on campus. Because again, he was trying to think, how can I do this in a way that really puts me a couple of steps away from the actual bomb going off? His MO is definitely, place it, let the damage be done, and then I can see the damage from far away. So the package never made its way to the Chicago Circle campus. Instead, it was returned back to Northwestern, and it exploded and injured a security guard who opened it mistakenly on May 25th, 1978. And that's his first bomb. It doesn't kill anybody, but it injures this security guard. He's a campus police officer. Terry Marker is his name.
Yeah. And really quick, I mean, the thing that I always found interesting about this too is that he documents everything in his journal.
Yes.
Very scientific method, right? So he writes up, like he will write up what happened afterwards or the improvements or the changes he makes. Again, total, very much a scientist. On this, he said, I hope that a student, preferably one in science and technology field, would pick it up and would either be a good citizen and take the package to a post office to be sent, or would open the package himself and blow his hands off or get killed. I wish I had some assurance that I succeeded in killing or maiming someone.
Yeah, not a nice guy.
So, but it's like the amazing thing about, again, amazing being the thing that stretches credulity about this is that his approach, that this isn't about something of value that he's hurting or that he's destroying, right? It's not, clearly he has no emotional tie to this or no emotional tie almost to humanity at some point. Like he's going for a maximum impact of damage and he's making, measurable changes to achieve that effect.
Well, he's even,
right? And that's what's so it's so removed that's what to me is spooky. And
he's even using the kind of social control that he'll write about in the manifesto. These ideas that he's had. He's making a bet that a person will find this, and instead of opening the package like society would tell them not to, they will be a good citizen, like he said, and they'll return it to the labeled address. So he's even playing on the notion that even that in itself is almost an experiment in social conditioning for him, which is really interesting.
Yeah.
So, and what we're going to find with Ted's bombs is and this is true of a lot of serial offenders. It's harder to make that claim really concrete for serial bombers because there aren't honestly that many bombers that go this long without being caught.
Mm-hmm.
But Ted he'll have kind of a period of violence and then a slowdown, kind of a recovery period. And then he'll have another period of violence and then a recovery period, and then a period of violence and then a recovery period. And sometimes those periods, the difference with him is those periods don't really follow the normal pattern we think of with, like, say, serial killers, where you get, you have the first victim, then there's like a 2-year period, a 1-year period, whatever, then another 2 victims, then a little bit less time, then more victims, less time, until finally they hit kind of berserker mode. With Ted, he is, again, it's so calculated and cold that you can see him make a change for a very specific reason that we're going to get into. But so anyways,
right.
After this first bomb, he actually moves back to Lombard, Illinois with his parents. He will take a job finally at the factory where his dad is working and where David is a supervisor. And so during this time, there's a couple of really weird events in this time period for Ted's life.
Yes.
Just super strange. So
which could almost be considered escalatory had he not already decided that this was his course of events, right? That's what I think too. It's like, it's weird that he already had, well, not weird, but ironic in some ways that he started bombing and then there's also all of these other things that lead to more estrangement.
You're completely right. Yeah, that's actually a really interesting point that I hadn't thought of before. But yeah, these are definitely kind of escalations in some weird way.
Mm-hmm.
So he's living with his parents, and then he essentially gets a crush on his supervisor at the plant. So Ted at this point is 36 years old. His supervisor, Ellen Tarmichael, who evidently Ted thought was a total babe, he gets a huge crush on her. And it turns into a friendship, kinda, and then sort of into dating, but not really, just kind of like, he got to know her, and it's the first woman that's ever given him the time of day, really.
Yeah.
And so David recalls this in a quote from David on this is, quote, "It was a Sunday and he had gone for a walk, he being Ted. He happened to see her car," David recalled. "She was filling the gas tank. I don't know exactly what transpired. He actually went to her apartment and played cards with her and her sister and her boyfriend. Later, Ted came home. He was obviously in a really good mood," David said. "He told me he had gone to see Ellen, that they had spent the day together and had played cards, and that some gestures indicating affection had passed between them. I was very happy about that," he remembered. "I was very happy about that. He remembered something his parents had once said about Ted eventually marrying and losing his rough edges. They had 2 dates, Mrs. Carmichael recalled. She said he seemed intelligent and quiet, and she accepted a dinner invitation in late July. It was a French restaurant, David said, and Ted ordered wine and he smelled it. He made a big deal of it, David added. He had a good time. 2 weeks later, they went apple picking, and afterwards went to his parents' home and baked a pie. That was when she told him that he did not want to see him again. I felt we didn't have much in common besides our employment, she said. Ted did a total shutdown, retreating into his room, David said. He also wrote an insulting limerick about Mrs. Carmichael, made copies and posted them in lavatories and on walls around the factory. He did not sign the limerick, but his relationship with the woman was known, end quote. Now, listeners, we're a serious podcast. We take our work seriously. We tried to find this limerick for a lot of time.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time looking for this dang limerick. Can't find it. Could not find it. Which is a real shame because I bet it was weird, like Ted is weird.
Yeah, and it's so weird that that's how he acts out too. And
well, again,
there's been
It's that you do something and you let it sit and you wait for them to discover it, and then you're like, well, it wasn't me. I wasn't here. You know? It's that same thing that he did when he was a kid with the explosions, right? And the pranks, quote unquote, where you set up something and then you can see the effect from far away, but it just puts you, it almost dehumanizes the event, or it depersonalizes it to such an extent that it's like a Rube Goldberg machine, right? Or what's another example? Like, I guess another example of it would be, you know, that old kind of moral conundrum or question of, you have someone in the electric chair and then you flip the switch in the room. What if we just attach that to, you know, someone, just the electric grid, and it was some random person's house that night, that when they flipped the switch, that person got fried, right? At what point does the personalization of the crime itself, like, does a person who flips the switch in person, you would seem to think that they would have some kind of personal connection to that event, and it would feel like they really did it. But if you're 1,000 miles away over the phone and they say flip the switch and you do it, did it really happen even? You know, for you personally?
Yeah, and I think the thing that's interesting is that he tried to have this emotional connection with this woman. He was rebuffed. And instead of like getting mad at her or being kind of upfront about his emotions, they're all sublimated. And it's like, you know, we were talking about a while back. It's like, it's almost like he's the modern day version of an incel, right? Like he's one of these people, like a troll, or like that just decides to lash out at women because he's been hurt.
Well, this is kind of this is kind of the olden time, you know, angry Facebook message.
Yeah.
You know?
Or exactly. Except it's a limerick, and he's, you know, but he has nothing to do with it. And it's sort of, again, it's like, it's weirdly enough that I'm sure that, like, you're going to get into, like, everyone else was like, dude, not cool. Right?
Well, yeah. So his brother, so David obviously sees the limerick and freaks out, right? I mean, you can't be doing this. She said no. It's no big deal, whatever, but you can't do this. And actually, David will say, David says this, and again, these quotes are coming from Prisoner of Rage, that amazing kind of magazine piece that was a long form piece.
Yeah.
So, quote, David confronted his brother. I was very, very angry, he said. Part of me was disappointed. He was so close to being integrated in the most primal rite of integration. He had an interest in a member of the opposite sex, and to have him go back to this kind of angry, inappropriate behavior, to the family, it was embarrassing, adolescent kind of behavior, end quote. And so David will actually tell him to stop with this kind of junk, and Ted reacts by putting the limerick right back up, and in fact puts it above David's desk. And so David fires him, essentially.
Perfect incel, right? Like,
yeah.
You try and rationalize, you try and use logic. You know, again, you're hurting your family, you're hurting yourself, you're hurting other people. And, you know, the most responsible thing, the most compassionate thing is to stop. Because what good are you possibly doing? And you double down instead.
Right. You decide, no, my initial reaction was the right reaction. So
yes.
him and David get into a big fight, as you can imagine. And David decides, I'm sick of this. This is ridiculous. And he goes back to Texas. And then Ted, this part is not super clear if he stays or if he goes back to Montana right away. But he will return to Montana soon. However, he then promptly sends another bomb. Now, and just before we get to this second bomb here, he actually will write a letter to Miss Carmichael later that David says has elements of an apology, but essentially though says, I blame you for what's happening, or I blame you for what happened there. And then said that he had thought about finding her and hurting her. So again, this is definitely an escalation here. And in fact, this might be the most, in some ways, this might be the most significant escalation, where this is really the first time that he is up to this point, he sent angry letters to newspapers and things, and he sent the bomb. But this is the first act of violence where he suggests, or, it's so obvious that it's him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He's really present for this one. And so it's interesting that he would do that.
It's interesting because if there was ever a chance for like a reprieve, right? Like he's home, on one side of the coin, he's at home, he's surrounded by his family, he's got a normalizing job, he has stability, he has socialization, he's making sort of the right inroads. So there should be this hypothetical combination of stuff that in one light would be helpful, or could have set him on the right, not the right path, but those are the things that, you make an assumption would be something that would be good for someone, but they're not for him, right? That's what sets him off, is stifling being around the family and having the family dictate to him what's a norm, right? Having to be, probably in a job that's beneath his agency, having him put himself out there and be rejected. So all of these things are sort of like, this is what normal people want. I tried it and look what happened.
Right. And it's so interesting too that this is the kind of stuff you should be getting up to in like high school.
Yes.
Right? You work a crappy job.
Man.
You work a crappy job at the foam factory.
Right.
You get, you have a crush on someone. They turn you down. It doesn't go well. It ends kind of uglily, right? Ugly. And you
do stupid stuff.
You do stupid stuff, right? You send them a nasty poem or something, right?
Absolutely.
You write, I don't know, Carmichael's a butt on a tree or something, right? Like that kind of stuff happens, but but not when you're 36.
Not when you're at the age where you are clearly should have much more of your life together. Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah.
So again, this falls apart in the fall of this falls apart in kind of the summer-ish area, or maybe not the summer, kind of like the early fall of 1979. And then a bomb is sent in May of 1979 so the summer of 1979 is when it ends, or early spring, I should say. So 1979, a bomb is sent to Northwestern University in Illinois again. And this one explodes and injures a grad student, resulting in minor cuts and burns. Then November of 1979, another bomb. Now this one is on board American Airlines Flight 444 from Chicago to Washington, D.C. It doesn't result in anyone. It ends up in some smoke injuries, like smoke inhalation injuries, but it doesn't actually hurt anyone. And then the next bomb comes in June of 1980, and this one again is in Illinois, in Lake Forest. This one goes to the home of Percy Wood, who is the president of United Airlines, and it results in severe cuts and burns all over his body, over most of his face. Disfigures him. Really, really does a number on this guy.
And for what he actually had to say about it, too, and this is from Harvard and the Unabomber, Alston Chase has his reactions after every major event. After the second bomb, I'd hoped that the victim would be blinded or have his hands blown off or otherwise be maimed. At least I put him in the hospital, which is better than nothing. But not enough to satisfy me. Well, live and learn. No more matchhead bombs. I wish I knew how to get a hold of some dynamite.
Well, live, laugh, love.
Right?
What are you going to do?
And it's
what are
sort
you
of
going
like
to do, Marie? Say la vie.
His like turning the corner on like, well, now I know. And then the third, okay, again, like he is putting a bomb in an airplane, which to me is, so these first two are going to an individual, right? Which is still a heinous event. But when you decide to take down a commercial airliner, you have just made the move into domestic terrorism. Right. I mean, you have decided that you are going to do something that is going to disrupt and terrorize a mass population.
Right. Yeah. Right. You've jumped from targeted murder to mass murder.
Yes. Right. And it's, to me, it's like, what's interesting too, in reading it and thinking about it, is like the first two were to an individual, and then he's like, you know, I'm going for an airline. And he said, some of my notes, I mentioned a plan for revenge on society. Plan was to blow up an airliner in flight. Unfortunately, plane not destroyed, bomb too weak.
Yeah. And so it's really with the bomb, the third bomb in that series. So at this point, he's done 4 bombs total. The first one in 78, and then kind of the quick succession, bam, 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 from May to June of, from May 1979 to June of 1980. That 1981, going to Percy Wood, the president of United Airlines, that is the first one that's truly dangerous in any significant way. That's the first one that would be considered really lethal.
Yes. Was particularly satisfying because it was an immediate and precise directed response to the provocation.
Now,
contrast it with the revenge I attempted on the jet airliner that bothered me in Montana. I long felt a frustration and anger against the planes. After completing preparations, I succeeded in injuring the president of United Airlines, but he was only one of a vast army of people who directly and indirectly are responsible for jets.
Imagine just being so mad at a plane that you're like, I'm gonna get you, plane. I'm gonna get you, plane.
And he says thus it felt good to be able for a change to strike back immediately and directly.
Completely ridiculous.
I mean, and just like, holy smokes, like,
yeah, it's serious.
Me, there's just like, again, like, you're not just a plane, right? Like, he's mad at planes, which he's mad at planes because they made noise or whatever it is. But like, again, that is a mass commercial transit for not just the United States, but the globe, you know? And you just tried to blow it up, and then you go after the president of one of the airlines. That's like the hockey stick angle of the curve of his trajectory of going from, you know what, like this is a like you said, a murderer and needs to be, you know, and should be prosecuted and dealt with, to seriously something that's even beyond that is pretty steep, pretty fast.
No, yeah, it ramps up. I mean, this guy's got some balls.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
So this is the point with the bombing of Percy Wood, and then obviously the airline as well. This is when the FBI puts together the task force that would give him his moniker Unabomber.
Yes.
Which he's labeled that because he is the university and airline bombing suspect, or the university and airline bombing case, or Unabomb. Yes. At this point, the only clues they have at this point are from the bombs themselves and from his choice of victims. But again, he is being meticulous with these bombs. He is ensuring there's nothing on these bombs that he is thinking consciously will give him up in some way. Although there are little unconscious things that are going to be used to build a profile against him. Now, you already know my opinion on profiling on this show. You guys already know what I think about it. Not super great. This is one case where the FBI really points to this one and says, this is the one where it shows that profiling worked. We're going to get into that claim a little bit here. However, the initial profile of the Unabomber is actually pretty good. The problem is that they throw it away.
Yeah.
So the first profile of the suspect here is going to be, so here, okay, here's a quick rundown of the clues themselves. The bombs are made out of wood and have a lot of wooden components and materials. Sometimes they even have twigs and things taped inside of the bomb themselves. The guy also just seems to be generally obsessed with nature in some way. So, for instance, Percy Wood has wood in the name, right, of him.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the other, the bombs and things, the way that they're actually made, one will be inside of a book that is from Arbor House Publishing, which has a prominent logo of a leaf on the side of its covers. There are other links to the wood angle as well, right? He uses a particular type of stamp, which is kind of interesting. It's kind of an old-timey stamp, but he uses them in such a way that they're widely available. It's not very easy to it's not really easy to track them around, so to speak, right? And he's also very careful about how he's mailing things as well.
Yeah, and they're inside wood boxes, or they have some wooden component to them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. So what's interesting is he used some of these stamps in interesting ways. So when he just wanted to injure people, he would use a Frederick Douglass stamp. And when he wanted to kill someone, he used a Eugene O'Neill stamp.
It's a Eugene O'Neill $1 stamp.
Yeah, which is just fascinating.
Again, maybe it's just completely like it's his own intelligence deciding to toy with whoever's going to receive this stuff.
Yeah. The other thing that they find in all these bombs, or in most of them rather at this point, is a piece of metal or wood that has been stamped or etched with the letters FC. At this point, the FBI does not know what those mean other than them being a calling card. They think, because again, he seems to be targeting technology centers and stuff, that maybe FC stands for F computers, or maybe it means something about him being a foreign diplomat or a driver of a foreign diplomat, because that is the logo or the letters that go on their kind of official license plates for their cars. They also think maybe that he might be some kind of crazy environmentalist or a lumberjack or someone who has these kinds of someone whose job is being taken away by technology was also something that they thought in particular. That's because, again, it seemed like he was going after the airlines in particular with these two major bombs. So they had a couple of different things on these, but they really did not have a lot of clues. The only thing that they could say was that these were coming from the same person. Another big piece of the puzzle, though, is it coming from the same person, are actually the design of the bombs. So Ted actually created his own kind of particular design of the initiator part of the bomb. He used what was called a double initiator. And so it was handmade. Again, it was designed by him. The FBI experts on kind of, munitions and bombings would actually go on record and say that they had never seen a double initiator quite like this. And again, that pointed them towards someone with technical skills, someone with the ability to engineer and build something. So potentially a mechanic, potentially someone with academic credentials, maybe. However, at this point in time, there are two really major competing, I guess, profiles, but ideas of what the person might be. The first one is a potential academic, someone with a connection to universities, someone who is technically capable and intelligent enough to create their own kind of bomb, and someone with really a fetish or a huge opinion, huge thing about nature and anti-technology. That's the first good profile. That profile,
which is pretty much, that's not bad. That's right.
It's pretty close, right?
Pretty close. That was the one that thought he was much older than he actually was, though, right?
Yes. That will be thrown out for a profile that paints him as a relatively young mechanic, or ex-mechanic rather, whose job at an airline facility was taken away by new technology. So again, an anti-technology viewpoint, pro-nature, pro-going back to kind of, the land sort of view. Now, the one thing that all of these profiles did get right was that he had strong connections to the Chicago area. But that's kind of a no-brainer, right? I mean, all of his victims have been in Chicago so far.
Well, to train professionals like the FBI, yes. Not to, like me.
Well, right? Yeah, sure. But,
yeah, that is like, I think that was, they had the evidence to actually make that connection with some safety.
Sure. So at this point, it's the 1980s, and him and David have kind of patched things up a little bit. They're talking about, again, David living on the land some more and Ted going back and doing his own thing too, and they've sort of made up somewhat. But Ted's relationship with his parents just gets worse and worse and worse.
So they patched things up.
So it's the 1980s. David and Ted are patching things up. They're talking via mail, right? They're kind of being friendly again. But Ted's relationship with his parents just gets worse and worse and worse with time. So the parents would go visit Ted at his cabin, and then they'd think everything went, perfectly well. And then they'd get home to Chicago, and there would be angry letters from Ted, bemoaning them and berating them for what they did or how badly they treated him when he was a kid.
Right. And by the way, like them going to visit him in the cabin is basically a one room. It's just one room.
And it can't smell good. It cannot be pleasant to visit him like this.
No, and imagine, listeners, your parents coming. If you decided to live in one room and dedicate yourself to some very esoteric thing, even if it was nonviolent, you're out in the woods, you're living off the land, you have one room, you don't really have electricity or anything else. Imagine your parents coming to visit and having that go well.
Well, it's just such a weird, me and Katie are so paranoid when people come visit us because we have been in those situations where like you go over to someone's house and they're like, oh, we only use breast milk here. And you're like, what am I supposed to do?
They do not.
No, that's never happened. That's never happened. But you know what I'm saying, right? I mean,
it's always like taking the shoes off.
Exactly.
Like, hey, we take our shoes off here. And I'm like, you do?
Yeah, okay. I did not wear the right socks for this.
I was like, okay.
Yeah.
I was like, what? Is that okay? We're taking our shoes off? Or does anybody know what they're getting themselves into? And I'm like, apparently not.
Yeah, you want to be comfortable. And so in a situation like this, I mean, again, I feel bad when my friends who are vegan come over and I'm like, we only have one kind of hummus. I'm so sorry. I'm a terrible person.
Kielbasa.
Yeah. Like, could I interest you in a jerky slice? Anyways, so David will talk about this as kind of a period of Ted deteriorating. And he's not getting better. They were hoping he would get better with time. But his isolation in the cabin, his time spent away from people is just making him worse and worse.
Yeah.
And so it gets to the point where the parents just cannot even talk to him anymore. He basically tells them, you ruined my life. You turned me into this hermit, basically. And I blame you for this. And so I do not want to talk to you. So fine. Mm-hmm. They don't talk. And so Ted will end up having a relationship with them where if they have to write him and they want him to respond or even read the letter, they need to put a red line underneath the return address. And he will eventually institute that with David as well, but for an even more ridiculous reason. And I mean, again, your relationship with your parents is always complicated. Mm-hmm. And like we said in those first episodes, you can kind of see his point of view in some cases with the parents of, you guys turned me into this little genius and I hated it and I wanted to play tuba and you made me go to Harvard instead of Oberlin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You can see it. You can see his point in some cases. But again, if there is ever a place that you can go and change that trajectory for yourself, it's college.
Yeah, and also when you get to be 37, you don't get to blame other people for who you are.
No, it stops being your parents' fault. The minute you leave high school, I mean, again, he was 16 when he went to Harvard. Give him a little slack in Harvard, right? But still.
And I'm not saying that you aren't a product of nurture with your family and that's good and bad and can skew one way or the other for a lot of people. But I am saying, like, at a certain point, you are an adult and you don't get to, like, you have a responsibility to yourself that you don't have when you're a child because you don't have that awareness. But as an adult, you have an awareness that you have a responsibility to heal yourself if you are wounded. Yeah. And I don't think that kicked in.
No,
him,
it never.
right?
No, it never did. So he then sends another bomb. So October 8th, 1981, he sends a bomb to the University of Utah. This one is diffused beforehand, thank God, so it doesn't injure anybody. He then sends in May 5th of 1982 a bomb to Vanderbilt University in Tennessee, which ends up getting found by a secretary, or rather it's delivered, and the secretary opens it and it injures her, again causing burns and then cuts and stuff from shrapnel. Then he will begin a series of bombings, two in fact, at it's not much of a series. Let's put it this way: he begins kind of a primer and then the sequel, right? The first bomb and then a second bombing will come later to the California system, University of California, at Berkeley campus of specifically the engineering school. This bomb gets sent in July 2nd, 1982, and it goes to Diogenes Angelakos, who was an engineering professor, who in particular was the head of the electrical engineering department at the time. This bomb, it again causes severe burns. The shrapnel causes, lacerations to his hands and his face. But within this bomb, he leaves a clue, which again will be part of that series of kind of red herrings that he leaves in particular on purpose. The bomb has a note inside of it that says, "Woo, it works. I told you it would, RV," with woo being spelled W-U. And this, as well as all the other kind of red herrings, would lead investigators down, months-long chases of this info. And they're, they're running searches on everyone with the last name Wu that they can find, essentially, with any links to Chicago or California or Tennessee and Utah, right? They're just trying to find someone, any lead for this.
And you have to eliminate that.
Yeah.
Right? You can't say you ignored that, even though it's far-fetched.
Absolutely. And so at this point now, the investigators are thinking, we really don't know what we're doing just yet. However, they will get a good lead, but they will not necessarily be able to do anything with it when a janitor says that he saw someone with a mustache leaving the building that he had never seen before, a white guy that matched Ted Kaczynski's description. So, interesting.
Could have been Jake. Sorry.
Could have been Jake. That's why he shaved the mustache.
Jake, I'm so sorry. It wasn't you.
And then the bomber...
You weren't even a glimmer in your dad's eye.
No, not yet.
Never even mind. Okay.
The bomber then goes silent, and they don't hear anything for the next 3 years. And again, this is really weird because...
It's a long time.
Again, he's basically been bombing every year, at least once a year for the past 5-6 years.
Yeah.
So he has really been very active at this point, and he goes silent. And so the FBI thinks, well, maybe we got lucky. Maybe this guy got locked up. Maybe he got institutionalized. Maybe he got killed. Maybe a bomb went off when he was experimenting. Or they thought maybe he got the result he wanted. Maybe enough people, who knows, right? What kind of crazy things might be in someone's head. But that is not what's going on. Ted spends the time perfecting a better explosive concoction. So up to this point, he was using smokeless powder, essentially a mixture of gunpowder and some other chemicals that's easily ignited and then causes an explosion. He's now using a different type of explosive that burns longer, creates a much bigger explosion, and has the ability in a smaller area to send more shrapnel flying faster. And so this is the point now where the bombs go from, again, they're lethal. The first period, they're essentially, they're dangerous, but they're like fireworks, right? They're like homemade fireworks. They're going to pop. You're going to burn your hand. Maybe it'll get in your eye. You'll get scratches and cuts and things, but it's not going to hurt anybody. The next round become very, quite dangerous. You're going to get burns, whatever. This is the first round where they could really kill.
Right. And it's I think, worthy of note of two things. Like, he has always had the intent to get to this place.
Absolutely. You
So,
like in the quotes in the quotes you've been reading from Harvard and the Unabomber.
Yeah.
Every time he fails, he writes in his diary, another failure.
He's mad. Like, that, you can tell that that's motivating him. But then also, like, think about, like, the discipline it took for 3 years not to act out. Right? Because it's like, he's formulating his next big and better. And it's like, he clearly craves that reaction to have that, to have that revenge, that he is going to make these people pay. And to go 3 years is a pretty long period of time to not have that satisfaction.
That release, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So the first of the new series of bombs that he will send, again, like we said, is kind of a continuation of the first sent over to the California campus of the the Berkeley campus of the University of California. This next bomb gets sent May 15th, 1985. It goes again to Berkeley, and it will explode with a graduate student. It will lead to the loss of 4 of his fingers, a severed artery in his right arm, and then the loss of vision in one of his eyes, partially. And so thankfully, this guy will actually survive his injuries, but it could have definitely killed somebody. The next bomb goes to the Boeing company. And the first one was May 15th. This next one is June 13th in 1985. This one goes to the Boeing company in Washington State. Again, this one is diffused. So no deaths there. Then in very quick succession, so again, we have May, then June, then November 15th, 1985, he sends a bomb to the University of Michigan, which will lead to, again, burns and shrapnel loss on a professor and his research assistant. And then in December of 1985, a bomb will go off outside of a computer store in Sacramento, California, where Hugh Scruton, the owner, will be killed by the bomb. This series of bombings leads to a bunch of other leads for the FBI, but again, they're all red herrings. So first off, that bomb that got sent to Boeing, it is sent in a kind of interlocking case that is very similar to the kind of cases or the kind of locks and sort of interesting mechanical locking devices that don't use screws and things that are found in prosthetics at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so they think, well, this is very similar to a way that a prosthetic is packaged and sent out. So maybe he works in a prosthetic company. Maybe he's got a prosthetic. Maybe he's got whatever, right? The next one is they think maybe that this bomb that is sent over to Hugh Scruton, the one that actually kills, right? Mm-hmm. They think after this one, they're looking at the list of things and they're trying to find these clues, but now they have a death on their hands. And this is when the search goes into overdrive, right? Like, this guy's killed somebody now. He's proven he can do it, and he's going to do it again for sure. He's definitely going to try again. So they now start looking at, originally their list of suspects, they don't have a list of suspects per se. They have a file drawer of suspects. They have categories of people they think could be the suspect. Their categories, though, explode. They balloon, right? They go from looking for, technical specialists in the very beginning with that original good profile to looking at mechanics, anybody with any kind of connection to the airlines, whatever, right? That doesn't really work all that well. But again, that's where they're looking to now. And that's in those specific states. Now they're looking for anybody across the country because he is no longer focusing just on Chicago, but instead focusing on a bunch of different places. And the way that the bombs are making their way through the post office suggests someone with some kind of knowledge of how that would work. So one thing that they point out is that it had specific postage, or it had exact postage every single time on the bombs, or near exact postage. Another one is that these are being sent from different post offices. They're not coming from the same post office.
Right. The FBI believed that the Unabomber had definite knowledge of not just sort of postage, but the actual idea of like how postage got to where it was supposed to be in postal streams. So it enters a carrier route, and then it goes into a huge postal hub, and then it is sent or trucked to where it's supposed to go. It goes into another postal hub, and then it's put into another carrier route. So it goes from very, again, from being delivered or being a post, your individual into a much bigger sorting area. And that is where they were able to go in and try and identify and try and pull some of these packages that they were able to preemptively find. However, and that was where it was coming out of Chicago, but he was also able to realize that that was going to happen, and that you see he either hand delivered them or switched it up and went into different postal streams.
Right. Well, a lot
which
of the
at
times,
the time is pretty amazing to think about.
Well, a lot of the times he's putting postage on these things, but then he's just hand delivering them. So it's not even it's not going through a post office.
So he's not even getting that.
No,
right.
he just bought postage someplace, and he's
and
traveling
he does
around.
lament the fact that he doesn't get any sort of he doesn't get any kind of injury or fatality, and he's having to go out of pocket a lot. He's living on a very shoestring budget to begin with, and he's having to spend a lot of money to travel and deliver these deadly devices.
He would have loved Amazon Prime.
Oh my God! Can you imagine what Kaczynski thinks of Amazon? That's amazing.
Can't be happy about it.
Oh my God!
Anyways, so after that bombing at the computer store, the other thing that the FBI finally decides to do is it has to go public with this story. It has to tell people there is in fact a serial bomber on the loose. We need help. Please give us your tips, anything. And they get a lot of different hints and things. Like people will call and say, I think a lot of people evidently call the FBI when things like this happen and say that they think it's their ex-husband or ex-wife or their, ex, boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever for different reasons. And the FBI, evidently that is such a common thing that all of the articles on this that I read mention it, that people say, well, my ex-husband hated planes. And they're like, okay. And so then they gotta, they look into it and nothing comes of it. But it's a tremendous waste of time. Or rather, here's the thing. The public saying, I don't think generally that the public will report it and just say it, I just want to get back at my ex. You know what I'm saying?
It's probably the outlier, right?
Right. That's probably the outlier.
That type of thing is very much,
But still, suddenly they've opened the floodgates to everyone in America being able to call up and say, I think it's, Jerry down the road because I've heard some pops coming from his house, right? Or, I don't know, Mary's ex-husband was a, an airline mechanic and then he
seemed
died
like a
in
hothead
a company.
That worked for United. Yeah.
Right. So it opens it up. It opens the floodgates.
Yeah. And any kind of conspiratorial thinking that goes on with that as well. Like if you have a mindset that you have somebody in mind that would do something like this and all of a sudden it comes to fruition, you probably are going to, call that in.
So then David visits Ted in Montana for 2 weeks. And they spend a lot of time with each other. They, obviously they're in a cabin alone, right? But David will sleep in a tent outside because he doesn't like it inside the cabin, actually. He says it feels cramped to him, which is kind of funny.
Can't imagine.
And then it's kind of a funny anecdote in there. Ted is kind of embarrassed that he has a crank operated radio. And David is like, what is this? Are you listening to rock and roll? It's kind of funny that Ted is like, I only use this for the news and weather. Will you explain this to, man? You look, ridiculous. Anyways.
Well, and it's like the sibling thing. Like, why make fun of your brother has a crank radio? Come on.
Yeah. It's so funny. So
that's good.
They leave, David will say, I didn't notice anything weird about the time period. There are no chemicals, there's no bomb making stuff, whatever. But the Unabomber strikes then again in February of 1987. And so I want to read this quote from Prisoner of Rage here because I think it's really great. So, quote, "The Unabomber was always careful. He never left fingerprints. The stamps on his packages were never licked. lest saliva become evidence for DNA experts. He was always well away when his explosions occurred. But on February 20th, 1987, when one of his bombs went off outside a Salt Lake City computer store and injured an employee, something extraordinary happened. A woman nearby spotted the man who had left the bomb package. He looked right at her, and she remembered him clearly. A hooded sweatshirt, a mustache, reddish-brown hair, a square jaw, and menace lurking behind the aviator sunglasses. He panicked. The bomber, who had meticulously covered his tracks for nearly a decade, had made a mistake. He fled. And as the woman's description became a sketch that found its way into newspapers and magazines across the country, he retreated into the shadows and halted his bombing campaign for 6 years.
Wow.
And that is really the end of kind of the middle period of bombings.
Yes, but gives us one of the most recognizable images, I think, like, you know, in the 20th century.
Absolutely.
Is the drawing of that, right? And how many times that's been utilized in other stuff. It's, you know, because the thing is it's, she saw him, she identified him, but that's anybody.
Right.
That's no one. You know, that's like what they already knew, which was he was a white guy, right?
Well,
who could grow facial hair.
Right.
And that's it.
Yeah.
That's it. They didn't, that was the one thing that the profiles, you know, was consistent. It's a white man.
It's pretty interesting.
Not that
right?
every white man is going to bomb, but just saying that was consistently throughout.
That was definitely consistent throughout. So it is now the
6 years too.
Yeah, a 6 year period without bombing. But now in this period, he starts a weird friendship with some random guy in Mexico. So he starts sending letters back and forth with a friend of his brother, a farmhand named Juan Sanchez Arriola, who lived in Ojinaga, Mexico. So originally, Juan Sanchez sent the letter. He just kind of had David forward a letter over to anyone he knew because this guy was asking for money to help with medical bills. And instead, the Unabomber was like, oh, a friend. And so they started sending letters back and forth. And really, this guy probably becomes Ted's only real friend, you know? And he gets letters from him talking about his frustration and how lonely he gets and how much he wishes he had a wife. And, you know, it's sort of an oddly human side for this guy that has never really had a close relationship.
Well, yeah, and he can't act out, right? He has no other means of expression.
Right.
That's productive or otherwise.
So 1989, David brings Ted pretty devastating news for Ted.
Mm-hmm.
You know, David says, well, listen, I've been seeing a woman. Her name is Linda Patrick. I've known her since high school. And I've always kind of liked her. And I wrote her a love letter. Juan told me to write her a love letter because we all have this weird relationship with Juan. And it worked. And so now we're going to get married. You know? And
that does not bode well.
No. And so Ted basically says, well, we can't talk anymore. I no longer want to talk with you. This woman is manipulating you. This woman who is, you know, going to use you and take you away from nature. And you're going to start living in New York. And he wants to move to Schenectady, New York. You know, and Ted is really angry about that. And it's just said it's ridiculous, right? And so
again, a really healthy outlook on women too.
Right. And so, he says that, you know, he literally says, David, you're throwing your life away by getting married, even though he's writing these letters to Juan saying, I wish I hadn't thrown my life away by going into the woods. You know, he's attacking David for not living the kind of pure life that he thinks he wants, or the kind of pure life that he is living. But he knows how lonely that life is. Right. He knows how terrible it is. Yeah,
well, it's not like any of his stuff is really truly logical, right? I mean, he is jealous. He's angry. He's like, the one member of the family who he hasn't completely ostracized from his life is now normalizing with everyone else that something he's just not able to do. But he probably, on some level, recognizes that that's not just what's expected of him, but what he wants. But there's nothing that's going to get him to that point.
It's just crazy, right? This anger here at this.
Yeah.
And so
yes,
a few weeks later, Ted sends him another letter basically saying, I'm sorry for the way I acted with that. I'm just really worried about dying because I have a heart arrhythmia, which I've recently become aware of. And David is like, I don't think that's true. That's kind of weird. Right. And so,
right. Did he ever, I didn't find anything on that. Did he actually have that diagnosis?
I don't think so. I think it's just
sort of a
I think it's a hypochondriac or hypochondriac kind of thing. You know what I mean? I don't know. I have no idea.
They just wanted attention.
I think he just gets so angry that his body goes into like panic spirals. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know if you ever had that kind of like really deep panic attack, but like he gets so emotional that.
What do you think wakes me up in the morning, man?
I'm just saying, like his.
If it's not the existential angst, it's the deep panic attacks.
I think he just gets so worked up that he can't handle it. You know what I mean? Anyways.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Or he's just telling him that because he wants him to feel bad.
He wants him to
connect, right? I have to have this person feel bad. I just isolated myself from them and said all these terrible things, and I can't say I'm sorry because the one thing that the Unabomber has never in his personal life was to have that.
No, he's never really
felt
sorry.
So this is the closest. Yeah, so this is the closest you can get is if I can get you to pity me or to feel bad for me, that will circumvent me having to take any kind of responsibility for my actions as well.
So he basically starts to tell Sanchez, well, I'm officially out of the family. It's kind of all over for me. David will move to Schenectady. Their father will commit suicide in October of 1990. And Ted doesn't even attend the funeral.
Which is, yeah.
Even though his father, gave him the love of nature. So he does send his condolences to his mother. He calls her and offers his condolences and talks to the family and things, which is not a normal occurrence at this point. And the mother then will write him and ask him to talk about how painful he thought his childhood was. Why does he hate her? Why does he have this painful relationship with her? And he sends back a letter. He sends back a letter essentially at the beginning is kind of toned and normal, but just crescendos quick. And it goes on and it becomes basically like a laundry list of you're a terrible mother, you did all these terrible things to me, whatever. So he writes in particular, quote, "You're more interested in having a brilliant son than seeing that son happy and fulfilled," end quote. Which again, you can kind of see the point. And then the mother writes back, kind of that way that, I don't know, it's a very like teenaged.
Well, that mothers do.
It's a very teenaged argument almost, right? Where you're complaining about something happening to you or that you don't feel like life is fair to you at the moment or whatever. And then she writes back and says, well, you're such a handsome, smart boy. Why don't you just go out there on the dating scene? And he's like, that's not what I want to hear right now, mother.
But it's also like, again, how old is he? Like he can no longer put this back on anyone or anything else. There is nothing else that he has full agency over his life to be able to do something with it. What he's chosen to do with it is evil, but instead of like recognizing, but his mom's not the problem, the litany of it, the litany of like, you just wanted a child genius. Again, like you said, that's cool up until you're like 20, I'm going to say maybe 24, 25. And then no, man, that doesn't hold water anymore.
No. So David then I know.
Poor
Well, the
mom,
mom,
too,
you know,
like,
we said that
God.
first quote in the beginning. We said that
on.
first. I don't even know if we mentioned this quote in the beginning, but it was from Prisoner of Rage, or maybe it's from My Brother the Unabomber. I can't remember where this is from, but it's in some of the literature here for this, where they talk about after the sentencing, they met with one of the victims of one of the people that he killed.
Oh, yeah.
I think it was Moser's.
Yeah.
I can't remember the exact person they met with, but they met with someone, the family of someone who was killed by the Unabomber. And, you know, the mother starts to say, you know, well, we didn't raise him to be like this. I can't believe this happened, and I'm so sorry, and whatever. And one of the daughters or something says, you know, you can never know what you took from us, right? Or, you know, he's a monster. He doesn't deserve our pity. We don't, or that's what it is. She starts talking about the hospital event when he was a kid with the hives. And they say, you know, we don't pity him. Like, he killed someone. He took someone from us. He's a monster. He deserves whatever bad things happen to him.
Right.
And the mom kind of looks at the floor and says, you know, well, I wish he had killed me instead. And it's a very touching, you know, they all start crying, and, you know, it's a very touching kind of moment.
Right.
And you think, you know, just the guilt this woman must have felt is just tragic, right?
Well, yeah, and the husband has committed suicide because of illness, right? He had a fatal illness, and he decides to do that, which, again, you know, you could argue good, bad, and different about if they have the right to do that. But that's like a very traumatic thing to have happen in a family. And she's, you know, I think that's a lot to bear, I think, on top of everything else. And then you have a son that just, you know, that you can't reconnect to no matter how badly you want to, who had all this promise. And again, she's somewhat delusional because she can clearly see this person is on someplace in her knows this person is broken and could be harming others, I think, on some level that must have registered someplace. But the denial of that is so strong to sublimate it. Like, I just wish he would have killed me. Like, that's just like, holy smokes, man. That's heavy.
Not good dinner conversation.
Not
okay.
Not cool. Just not okay.
So,
not okay.
David will then David gets married in 1991. And this is really like, that's the end of their relationship.
Oh, I was going to say, and he's the best man. No,
that's the end of this relationship.
He leads the toast. Hey, David, do you remember that time? Nope.
This is really, too, this is the first time that Ted is really, he's finally succeeded in cutting everyone out of his life. You know, as much as he's tried, this is really the first time it's worked in some way. So the bombings then really heat up again. So the Unabomber comes back June 22nd, 1993. A bomb is sent. So there's actually two bombs that go off in quick succession. There's the June 22nd bomb in Tiburon, California, which goes to Charles Epstein, who is a geneticist, that causes partial hearing loss of 3 fingers, severe damage to his eardrums. And then in June 24th, a bomb will be sent and go off at Yale University in Connecticut. This one going to David Galemter, who is a computer science professor. This one leads to the loss of his right hand, shrapnel wounds, and severe burns. With this bomb comes a letter to the New York Times. And this is really the first time that the bomber has decided to speak. And it will prove to be his biggest mistake.
Yes.
So the bomb says that the FCs founded all of those bombs stood for Freedom Club, the group that is taking responsibility for these bombings, and that we are going to send further correspondence with an identifying number that will ensure that no copycats are given any kind of credence. And so the number he sends is in the form of his social security number, 553254393. Turns out it is some guy's social security number. I think the guy is dead now, or I'm sure he's gotten it changed since then, because it's all over the internet. But anyways.
And too clever by half, right? I mean, you're just recomplicating something that is, you're showing that I want to make sure that you know that this is me, and I have created this whole elaborate thing to make sure that that is the case, which is sort of like, I don't know, dude, you kind of got a captive audience. We're going to believe it's you.
Well,
you don't need a unique identifying pin
No.
that you enter and have it read back to you backwards in Esperanto to have it be legit. You
got us.
You got us.
You got it.
Here we are, New York Times. We're there.
At this point, too, what's kind of interesting, because again, the FBI does not know anything about these bombings, really. They have no leads at all that are any good.
Mm-hmm.
They actually think because of the time that these bombs are sent, and also they're targeted a geneticist and then a computer scientist, they think it might have something to do with Jurassic Park being released that week.
What? Really?
Yeah, being released recently around that time period, which is kind of interesting. But again, they have nothing to go on, right? And the message of Jurassic Park is definitely, we shouldn't be toying with nature with technology because it'll come back to hurt us.
Right. Well, at a certain point, like within 1983, they also were very interested in Dungeons and Dragons.
Yes, they were, of course. Well, Satanic Panic, right? We did that.
With Satanic Panic, but yeah, maybe it was somebody coming out of that whole sect, the co-creator, that could have some involvement in this.
So another,
just a little bit.
Maybe
still.
it's a goblin. So another thing that's on this letter is actually an impression on the letter that is just discernible with kind of the correct tools and things. And it says on it, call Nathan R. Wednesday, 7 p.m. But again, the FBI doesn't really still think that there's a big link between the victims. I mean, yeah, they're all professors, they're all whatever, but it's not like he's only targeting electrical engineers, or he's only targeting,
right.
He just seems to be going after technology generally, which is what he's doing, right? But there's no way to really link.
Right.
None of these people have any relations with each other outside of their general relationship as professors or technologists.
Yes.
And
they don't know if it's just one person either.
Right. And so, okay, that's the other thing this letter tells them, or at least suggests to them, is maybe some of those other clues that we've been sent are red herrings, because they think that this has to be a single person. Mm-hmm. Because given all of the money that they have put out as reward for any information, and given the fact that there's such a time disparity between the bombings, they're thinking if it's more than one person, there are going to be other bombings going on, or someone's going to crack, right? It's too long for this to have been a known secret to a group of people. Yes. So now they're thinking this guy is lying to us. Mm-hmm. He's got to be lying to us too. The letters, though, the letters and the correspondence of the Unabomber, and the way that this case is now progressing over time, lead David's wife to say to him, maybe your brother is the Unabomber. Maybe it's Ted.
Because they're publishing them.
Which
was a big deal.
Yeah. So, and, even when the FBI first came out and said, we're looking for anyone who's anti-technology, who maybe is violent, who maybe is, has something against these things. Even at that point, when he was telling her about Ted, she was saying to him, well, maybe, I don't know, maybe it's your brother. Like, maybe it's worth at least having a conversation with him about it. And David, of course, is hesitant. He doesn't think his brother has it in him. And at this point, too, the only correspondence they have is Ted occasionally writing, asking for money, to help him. Yeah. I mean, David doesn't know this, but to help him make more bombs.
Well, and it is, I mean, again, it would be a stretch to think that it's your brother. It's your family member who's doing this. Like, yes, he has problems, but again, like the denial that would go into that would be pretty big, pretty immediate.
As far as you know, your brother has never hurt somebody on purpose.
No. And he's almost like
never violently,
remedial and childlike and juvenile in his approach to things. Like how would it go from the limericks and being mad to this?
Oh yeah,
because it's not like he sees him on an everyday basis or is really connecting to that.
No, yeah. Leonard on Big Bang Theory
yes.
is going to be really surprised when he finds the severed heads in the garage. He's going to be really surprised. I hate that show. God, I hate that show.
I know you do. We've discussed, okay, quick side note, listeners. We have discussed in past episodes Chris's loathing of the Big Bang Theory and the treatise behind it. And I would agree. I haven't listened or watched it in, a number of years. I'm surprised it's still on. It's wrapping up, right?
I don't know.
This year it's supposed to be wrapping up?
I hope so. I haven't had to set a bomb yet. That's all I'll say. Okay, anyways. I won't. That's a joke.
Plausible.
That's a joke.
Plausible
It's a joke.
deniability has just gotten, there it is.
Okay.
See, that's the first thing, is they communicate outwards with their rage
So,
to people other than family members.
Oh, it's a joke, folks. Please, no letters. Okay. The bomber then sends, another.
That's at Chris F. Papa.
So
at Mad Scientist Family.
Another
Yes, go ahead.
bomb then gets sent out. So December 94, a bomb goes to Thomas J. Moser, or Moser, I guess. He's an advertising executive.
Moser, yeah.
And that will, it'll kill him, right? And this one gets sent in, he's in North Caldwell, New Jersey. Another bomb is then sent April 24th, 1995. And this one is just a couple days after Oklahoma City. So Janet Reno is already in a world of hurt. She's messed up some other things already. Oklahoma City happens. It's, things aren't looking great. And now another bomb from this Unabomber guy. And this one goes to a timber industry lobbyist named Gilbert Brent Murray, and he will also die. And this is in Sacramento, California. At this point, in Sacramento, so both of those bombs, because there's one in 94 and then one in 95, both of those bombs are actually sent from Sacramento. And the last bomb, actually a desk clerk at a local hotel, the Royal Hotel, Frank Hensley, says that he remembers, afterwards he says, I remember Mr. Kaczynski checking in, and he used the last name Conrad, which if you remember is the last name, it's the author that he loves.
Joseph Conrad, yep.
And so at this point, he sends his magnum opus, Industrial Society and Its Future, to every major newspaper and says that if it's published, he will hold off on the bombings for a period of time. And it is published in September of 1995. And this is the point now where the FBI really gets in a high gear.
Right. Well, the FBI is behind and advocating for it to actually go out, for it to be published.
Yes.
Because they're feeling like there's enough indicators within this, because they've given them a big enough sample set, right? He sent in these smaller letters that they read, they disseminated, they started to get some linguistic information from. But then he sends, how many pages was it? It was it's like 70 something pages, yeah. 70 pages, right? That is basically almost like a fingerprint to tell people who you are and how you think. And that's what does it.
Well,
I think that kind of that public, that seeking public, which to me, this is the most interesting point, isn't so much that they were able to disseminate who he was at this point, but what made him decide, I want to start talking to people about this.
Right.
There's this huge change. Was it because he lost the communication with his brother? Because it's not like he was talking to his brother about this stuff anyway.
No, I think...
But that outlet is gone. And he's like, I'm getting a hold of the New York Times, which you're quiet for 6 years. You can keep things for this huge amount of time, and then you decide that this is a good idea.
Honestly,
and this is almost to me like he wants to get caught.
Honestly, I think it has a little bit to do with Oklahoma City. I think he was jealous.
Really?
I think this guy is getting so much. He has been trying to send a bomb that'll hurt somebody for 20 years at this point. And some rank amateur, some dummy does it. Someone not as smart as Ted does it and manages to kill. I mean, it's horrible. But from Ted's,
Oklahoma City was.
But from Ted's
singularly,
from Ted's perspective, right? He's thinking, I think he is looking at he's like Monet looking at, a painting from Sears. And he's like, I cannot believe that those are the things that are being sold. I'm the artist. I'm the person that should be making the money from this. Do you know what I mean?
Interesting.
I think
it was Mozart and Salieri.
I think so. I kind of think so. Yeah. I think that he thinks, who the hell is this guy? I've been doing this for the right reasons for so long. And I also think too, he thinks he can ride a little bit of the wave of the Oklahoma City bombing and also say, and maybe this is, I can't say this exactly, right? But also say a little bit, well, now bombing is in the public attention again. And mine are getting better too. And I'm finally getting the responses I want from this.
Really?
And this is now the real time for me to do this.
I hadn't really considered that. I hadn't considered that. I just figured because the other thing is, it's not just during this time, anti-government, anti-technology sentiment is moving more mainstream. So, I mean, granted, it was never something as big as a bombing, but it seems like I hadn't considered that. I always thought, to me, it's like it is a question, like what was the factor that he had that moved from almost like a trial, like he was doing with the early bombs, like starting really small and just testing the water with stuff to this 70-page, full disclosure about who he is.
I think like a lot of
sent to 3 newspapers.
I think like a lot of revolutionaries or people that consider themselves to be revolutionaries, they always, the literature, the literature and the stuff that they're working with, the philosophy they're working from always says, and he even says it inside of the manifesto. He talks about how, society has to be at the right time for these things to take hold. And in his mind, the only way to do that is with massive violence. And so I think, again, this is a little bit like, I think this is a little bit like the Marxist revolutions in countries like, say, China or the USSR, using the craziness of World War II, or the after World War I, using that kind of
call to arms.
Well, not even call it arms. Using that kind of social trauma as because they think
propaganda.
Because he's been talking about since the beginning. He's been talking about how, and he talks about it expressly in the manifesto, that this is only going to be able to happen when society gets almost shocked awake by violence. It's only going to be possible when violence, that's why he's doing the bombings, because society has to be shown that these things are terrible. And now and
he hates planes.
Well, and he hates planes. And so he's never gone the step beyond of large scale terrorism, but he clearly played with the idea with the bombings of the airplanes. So I honestly think likely he would have progressed to another airline bombing shortly after this, because now his bombs have killed.
Fascinating.
He's now killed 2 people in a row. He's getting good at this now. So I think he would have. I think he publishes Industrial Society in its future, or it's whatever. He publishes the manifesto, and then I think then he would have done a large scale bombing somewhere. That's honestly what I think.
What do you think would have happened had he not published it? Had Oklahoma City not, because Oklahoma City too wasn't just one person. McVeigh was. He was part of it. Yeah, but it was a larger networked organization.
Sort of yeah, I mean, so I think
he doesn't have the same profile as,
no, he doesn't. I think if it wasn't published, I think he probably would have sent bombs to the newspapers.
Really?
Yeah. Or, I mean, to other places. Like, I think he would have kept bombing then. But there's no way once he sends it that he could not have then sent it to someplace else. Do you know what I'm saying? He even talks about how he didn't want Hustler to publish it.
Right.
He wanted it to go into good places, So I think it would have been published regardless. I don't think...
Which is amazing to me, too. It's like he doesn't want Hustler publishing the manifesto because of... Yeah. It's not peer reviewed.
It's ridiculous. So at this point now, and as Maria's kind of suggested, right, the thing that ends up catching the Unabomber is a field. Okay. The FBI has put out a thing saying we got to catch this guy. If you know anybody, let us know. That happened in, like I said, like 86, around there.
Yes. Does this sound like a friend or family member?
Right. It sounds like your weird neighbor. They're getting 1,000 tips a day. But one tip they get in stands out in particular. Some guy in New York forwarded over letters that his brother has been sending him for years over to him and to other newspapers. They come from an attorney, Tony Basile, who has sent the information to the FBI by way of a contact who is a retired FBI profiler. This guy's name is this guy sends those things over to Clinton R. Van Zandt, and they get sent over to him in early '96. This guy runs a forensic analysis on the manifesto and says it's like a 60% chance that this is the guy. He then runs it a second time and it gets even higher. So he suggests to the attorney that they contact the FBI because he thinks it's got to be the same guy. So the letter gets sent over to Molly Flynn, who's an FBI agent, who then sends it over to profiler James Fitzgerald, who has been working on the linguistic profile angle, essentially since the manifesto first came in.
Yes.
So this field of linguistic forensics is actually pretty fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's primarily used actually so I actually found a couple of, I was reading a lot of papers on this because I was trying to find, first off, okay, what does the science say? And the science seems to be pretty good, right? There's some controversy there with some of the ways it gets applied and things, but generally it's very sound theory and everything else. It seems to make sense, and it's borne out by the data. Legally, it's a little bit more iffy in the way that it gets applied sometimes. So it gets used a lot in trademark, actually, in like trademark cases.
Yes, which I could understand that.
Yeah, so they will look at like the linguistic profile, the nuance, the tenor, and kind of the timing and things of say like a piece of
variance between the two.
Right, a piece of literature or a song or something else, spoken word. And that way they'll be able to tell, there's a famous case where it's an author, this famous author published a fairy tale essentially, and then she changed around, she like picked words or phrases to change, but the way that she changed them, she picked less likely combinations of things.
Right.
And so they were like, well, there's no way you wouldn't do this intentionally. So it's very clear that you stole this. Right.
It was fighting upstream. It wasn't a natural change. Yep.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating. Like, to me, it's like language and how people use language. And when you try to hide, it's sort of like handwriting, right? Like when you try and hide handwriting or change your handwriting, it shows that, it indicates that, because it's almost too prevalent or too strong to do that to it becomes its own indicator.
Right. So here's actually the example that I'm thinking of, right? So it's a case to detect plagiarism. So it's Helen Keller wrote a short story, The Frost King. And then another, she was accused of plagiarism in 1892. So it found that it actually had been plagiarized.
She tried to plagiarize.
She did plagiarize.
Wait, Helen Keller did?
Yes.
Oh.
So she plagiarized a book by Margaret Canby that was called The Frost Fairies, which had been read to her sometime earlier. So what she found was that they changed only certain words or phrases. So Keller used vast wealth instead of treasure, which is 230 times less common in English. Bethought instead of concluded, which is 450 times less common. Bade them instead of told them, which is 30 times less common. And then Keller used the phrase, ever since that time, while Canby chose from that time, which again is 50 times more common than what Keller used.
Right.
So it found that they used a test on it.
Just totally like blowing me up about Helen Keller, but okay.
Yeah, it's fascinating, right? And so there's other cases too, But so the main ways that forensic linguistics get used in legal proceedings right now are author identification, right? Who wrote things, using their stylistics. That's what the Keller case kind of shows us, right? But also actually looking at what the language of the law itself actually means and how easy it is to understand the law. So the most famous case of linguistics being used in a legal case is the Miranda rights. The case of Miranda rights, right? How do you know that someone understands their rights under the law?
Right.
That's a linguistic question that we have to answer if we're going to ever treat someone in kind of legal cases, right? Other ones too, which are really interesting, are the analysis of emergency calls, ransom demands, and also death row statements. So analyzing whether or not a statement at death row is true or not is actually a really big part of the law as well. Okay. So
it's fascinating. I mean, language in itself and linguistics and how people use words, especially in writing, especially like in something like a manifesto, the idea that you would put out writing and it would be able to lead back to who you are or to give more information about where to find you it's like a fingerprint. It's fascinating to me.
Well, what's funny is we've kind of been running a forensic linguistics experiment here on the show without realizing it.
What?
Because people complain all the time about how many times I say right in an episode. And you do not realize how often you say a word or you say or you go back to the is one too, or all of that. Every time I say it, my brain is like is another one, Marie. It's terrible. It's terrible, Marie.
It's terrible. I find what I do is I interrupt myself. Like if I'm trying to put together a thought that I am just putting out, I will start something and then I will interrupt myself in the middle of it and then I will interrupt myself again. So I'll be like, okay, it's like when you're going to the zoo, but you're not, well, it's the book you read when you were in 7th grade. You remember that book? But it was like the heat was hitting your face, like you were in front of an oven. And you're getting someplace in your head, but you're not getting any place to anybody else.
No.
And I realize I do that quite often. And somebody actually sent me a older SNL skit about a guy who does that, and it was hysterical, and I was laughing, and then I was like, yeah, it's very funny.
Funny.
I am very self-referential.
Very funny.
Yes, but I agree with you, and you don't say it right a lot.
I do.
If you do, you know what?
No. It is super funny, and I love it, and I try my best not to say it, but it is definitely there. So
we'll just have to pay Jake more to edit it all out. Sorry.
That's
Poor Jake.
All right. So
first we have to pay Jake. Sorry.
I know. First the show would have to make money, then we could pay Jake. So the way that this analysis works essentially is you are trying to find patterns in the way that sentences are structured, common turns of phrases, like for instance, like or right or any of those other ones.
Yes.
And you're also trying to find similarities in the way that sentences are structured and also the way that stories are structured or the way that the writing itself is structured. So I'll give you an example. If you read something written by a scientific person or written a scientific article, it is way different than an article written for the humanities or a book or anything else.
Yes.
So that immediately gives you a hint that this person is trained in the sciences. And it even comes through in creative writing. So there are ways that you can pick apart those kinds of things, but there's also much easier ones. So actually, we had, again, the same guy who typed on the Unabomber's typewriter, Justin, told us yesterday at our party that yins is I guess like not Philly, but Pittsburgh. It's like a Pittsburgh thing.
What is?
Saying yins.
Yins?
I looked it up. It's U1s. It's supposed to be U1s, but turn it like, like y'all.
Yeah.
It's like y'all, but it's for Pittsburgh, so it's yins.
Interesting. Okay,
So like
I've never heard of it.
Yins are welcome here would be like, you are all welcome here.
Never heard of that.
But again, so yins, y'all, saying Coke or soda or pop, that would be another example of this kind of thing.
Davenport, sofa, love seat.
Yes,
Yep.
100%. Those would be examples of this too. But also with the Unabomber, there were some particular ones that stood out. And one was have your cake and eat it too versus eat your cake and have it too.
Mm-hmm. The
He
first one
said-
is the normal.
The first one is the normal one.
Mm-hmm.
But it turns out that it's kind of an error. Right? This is called idiolect. It's your individual dialect.
Mm-hmm.
Have your cake and eat it too is a misspoken version or a misremembered, not really misremembered, but over time it has been changed from the actual correct original saying, eat your cake and have it too.
Oh.
So this was kind of one of those things of him showing, I am refined and smarter than everyone else because I use it correctly.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So it was
yeah.
it was things like this that really led them to find this. But here's the thing, though, that it doesn't really work without without something to compare against.
Right. You have to have evidence to back that up.
Right.
To me, a linguistic profile has to have some other counterpart. It's not a vacuum. It's like you're not able to find all these idiosyncratic or cultural definitions in a document and have that be enough. You have to have something that is like, it's the lock, but where's your key for it?
Yeah. And we're making it really simplified right now. It gets even more complicated than this. So there are things, you might be at home thinking right now, well, then I could write a letter that would use the idiosyncrasies of, a Houston, Texas dialect. And I could then fool, 80% of people to think that I'm from Texas, Yeah,
except for profilers who would know you're faking it.
Well, so that's the thing, right?
I mean,
there are other parts of your language. So you could actually do, it's called a Q-sums analysis. But what it does essentially is it takes the cumulative, it looks at every single sentence and it basically plots out on the sentence, where do you put your nouns, your verbs, your adverbs, your whatever, right? Your connective. It essentially takes all of your connective words. So the, and, or, our, stuff like that, right?
Mm-hmm. Stuff you don't pay any attention to.
Exactly. It plots where those are within the sentence and how often you use each one over the sentence. And from that, it essentially creates a linguistic, almost, it's not a fingerprint because it's not, again, it depends on the statistical certainty that you can create from a large data set. But it really does allow you to do that analysis where you can actually say if an author, so the famous example of this for recent time is finding out that J.K. Rowling wrote that other novel that she did under the pseudonym.
Oh, yes. The Mysteries. Very good,
Yes.
by the way.
Yeah. So that was proven through a linguistic analysis, actually, that they found that it was her writing style, essentially.
Which is fascinating, right? I mean, because you basically, it's not like a fingerprint, but it's almost the same. You can't fake it. Like, you can't cheat it. And the more you try and cheat it, the more you give yourself away. Right.
Exactly. So what really seals this case, though, is David Kaczynski being a great person.
Well, and his wife.
And his wife being able to
vigilant, being like,
that.
Hey, sweetheart, I know, we haven't been together all that long and you love your brother and are constantly worried about him and his welfare. But you want to sit down? Yeah, I think he is the Unabomber.
So this is
tough conversation. Do you and Katie ever have something like that? Has she ever come to you and been like, Marie scares me and here's why?
No, nothing yet. Nothing I'm going to tell you about. All right.
Ow!
So
okay.
This is from Prisoner of Rage.
Mm-hmm.
And I, again, cannot speak highly enough of this long form article. So, quote, David Kaczynski read the manifesto and, with growing alarm, began a private inquiry comparing the document with his brother's old letters and essays. He saw striking similarities in the prose style and the anti-technology content. He had already begun thinking about the locales of Unabomber explosions and how similar they were to the places where his brother had lived or studied. By February, David, after agonizing over his findings, had turned to the FBI. Agents searching a shed at the old Kaczynski home in Lombard found matches, traces of gunpowder, and other compounds like those used in the earliest Unabomber explosions in the Chicago area in 78, 79, and 80. Wanda Kaczynski knew nothing about all this. She had just sold the home in Lombard for $100,000 and had moved to Schenectady to be near David. The county trunk is an unpaved road that snakes south out of Lincoln, turns east and rises up into the high country towards Stemple Pass, which cuts through the Rocky Mountains at 6,373 feet. 5 miles from town, just short of the pass, a muddy side road branches off up a hillside and disappears into the dense aspen and juniper woods. That's where the men went. They might have been taken for hunters if anyone had noticed them out in the snow. They had guns and binoculars, and they moved cautiously, like stalkers. They had rented rooms at a hotel in town in February, but people had been too nosy and they had moved to 2 cabins on a ridge up near the pass. Only Butch Gehring, who lived up there, knew who they were, and he had been sworn to secrecy. For 18 days they watched, peering down through the winter woods with their binoculars and telescopes. Elk and deer and once a cougar crossed their lenses, but by late March they had not seen the mountain man. They knew he often stayed in for weeks, but they had begun to wonder. Mr. Gehring was sent to check. He and a forest ranger confirmed that the hermit had not slipped away. Waco and Ruby Ridge preyed on the watchers' minds. They wanted no blunders, no needless violence, but their force was growing. Up to 50 men were holed up in the area, and secrecy could not be assured indefinitely. They picked a cold, overcast day, April 3rd. Showers of snow and sleet fell from time to time. A mountain wind moaned and lifted the pine boughs. Canyon Creek gurgled with the spring melt. They formed a great circle, moving down the hillside and up the muddy road. Mr. Gehring went along. As they drew near, they came across a shed where the carcasses of several animals had been dressed and hung out to dry. Nearer still, a plot of ground lay cleared for a garden, enclosed by a tall wire fence to keep out the deer. A ring of cold stones marked a campfire cookery. The cabin, with a steep roof of green tar paper, was a crude wooden shack, its reddish-brown walls faded by many winters, a rustic coarseness against the gnarled bark of the woods. It was impossible to see in. 2 small windows were set up high to catch the light, but keep out prying eyes. A jumble of bottles and cans lay heaped like a medieval midden against the cabin door. The door itself was hinged and fitted with a hasp for a padlock, useful for locking up when the mountain man was away. But he was here now, silent inside, his door secured by a deadbolt. They used a little ruse. Mr. Gehring shouted, something about the ranger needing help to fix the line between their adjoining properties. The door opened, and a shaggy man stepped out. They took his arms from both sides. Ted, one of them said, "We need to talk." End quote. And that's how they caught him.
Oh, my God.
They got him.
That's 17 years later, man. Right?
Crazy.
That's stunning. And it's stunning, too, because, I mean, imagine the fear. I mean, this person is proficient at booby traps, at bombing, you know, that entire area. 50 people, right? Probably were on, you know, constant lookout for tripwires and for what they could have found or what he could have done in the meantime. And it's just this tiny little place in the forest.
He ends up, they go in, they get his stuff, they find a bomb there, ready to go. The cabin itself gets seized.
Yeah.
And they're going to use it in trial. And Ted decides he would just rather plead guilty.
Yeah.
You know? But he ends up, it's just crazy. It's a crazy story, right? Even afterwards, I mean, you know, again, kind of the part that's interesting for us is the science and the idea of him and how the bombings happened and this person transforming from an academic into someone who's using their knowledge for evil, you know? But really, he ends up after the arrest, they find so many things in the cabin that point to it being him. Again, they find a copy of the manifesto, in his cabin. They find, comical amounts of stuff. They find, stuff to make bombs and things. So he ends up pleading guilty in April of 1996. At first he gets indicted in April of 96. He ends up being declared competent to stand trial, despite his defenders wanting to say that he is insane. It's something that he really does not want to have.
Right.
He says that it's a political diagnosis because they don't, again, his whole worldview is, of course, what I'm doing looks insane to those who are part of an insane society. It's kind of crazy. So he ends up accepting life imprisonment without the chance of parole. He pleads guilty in 1998. So he then actually says that he wants to withdraw his request, but the judge says, no, you can't, and it is upheld in higher courts. So in 2006, the judge declares that items from the cabin have to be sold in an internet auction.
Yes.
And
yes.
Yeah, so it goes towards $50 million in restitution that Burrell had awarded to his victims. So his personal items were everything else, right? It's just wacky.
But the idea, so there's a couple different things. There's an exhibit, an FBI exhibit, FBI okayed exhibit that happened where it had his actual cabin. It's called Inside Today's FBI Exhibit in Washington, D.C. And it has some of his writings, some of his weaponry, a exterior of the cabin. So it has either the actual cabin or something that is to scale of his cabin, right? So it's like you can go to this exhibit and you can actually see the scope and the size. You can actually look at this stuff, or you can actually bid on his personal effects, which I'm sorry, that's gruesome. That's like, to me, it's like, I think that they should, yes, I think that his victims deserve restitution. But the idea that you are going to, like his birth certificate, his school records, diplomas, right? Doctorate diplomas, all these things, like all the stuff that was his personal effects is kind of like, I don't know, I think that that's sort of ghoulish. Again, I think that that's sort of, he's a fetish. You're going to bid on these things and you're bidding against someone else for something that is basically just almost like,
yeah, it is. Yeah. No, it is. It's the part. Listen, I love collecting things. It's like it's something I wish I didn't like as much as I do, because it just takes up a lot of space, and it's a lot of the stuff is stupid and whatever. Right. But anyways, some of the things that we collect, at least me and my wife, are old pieces of, I guess I would call them like quackery memorabilia, right? Or fraud memorabilia. So, we have an animal, or quote unquote an animal. It's like not really paper mache, but it's made out of old fish guts and skin and stuff, and the head of a raccoon. Yeah, that was, that is what it was. Okay, it was part of a sideshow that traveled the country, and it was said that it was a mermaid, or no, the one I have. So they had a mermaid head, and I didn't buy that because it was too expensive. The one I have is it's supposedly a little champ, the Lake Champlain monster, or we have books on, we collect books obviously for the show, but that kind of stuff I can see. I can understand thinking that it is cool to see that stuff, but when it's linked to something horrible like this, it's you almost think it should be in a museum.
Well, I think the naturalization of it in a lot of ways too. Like they also, one of the things that I think is especially interesting that they auctioned off was a hooded sweatshirt, one of his hooded sweatshirts, and I think the icon of him in the glasses from that one picture has been reproduced in so many different mediums, in so many different kind of ironic hipster takes on it, that it sort of just perpetuates this whole mythos of him, that furthers you away from the fact that he was a killer, the fact that he was a terrorist. He was as bad as any other terrorist or any other fascist thinking crazy person out there.
Wow.
To be honest, right? I mean, but
no, yeah.
But seriously, I mean, come on, like because to me, I'm always like, oh, there is something interesting about him, and there is something that I don't want to be interested in, but again, like there's something about his discipline. There's something about the fact that he was such an intellectual. There's all of these things that are interesting.
I think it's also important though it is important though to study these things to know, to learn from them, right? It's
agreed.
So I'm with you though. I understand what you're saying.
Wholeheartedly agree. I just don't think that we should.
No, if they're in a museum,
like we should not be bidding on one another.
If they're in a museum and
yes,
the
they should be
families
in a
get
museum.
a cut of the museum proceedings, that is great. Do you know what I mean? That to me makes perfect sense.
Yes.
If there is a charity or something set up to help the victims of him, that makes perfect sense. But to share these items or to sell them out there, and again, like you're saying, to almost make out of him a myth cult figure is probably not super great.
No, and that's really what the case is.
What's
and
happened?
I mean, when you compare him against other bombers of the time, like I think, like I was looking at one article in The Atlantic called "It Took 17 years to catch the Unabomber, but 5 days to find Cesar Sayoc, who was the bomber just recently out of Florida," and it's like, you read that and you're like, man, that's because nobody touches the Unabomber. Look how good this guy was at what he did, right? But it's also like, I would say that FBI has become that much more sophisticated from learning
learned a lot from the case.
From that, right? From being able to understand these things as a group and as an institution, and that's more what's important than sort of glamorizing it and idealizing.
So Kaczynski gets sentenced to 8 life sentences without the possibility of parole. And so he currently is in ADX Florence, which is a Supermax prison in Colorado. Colorado.
Supermax.
Oh.
I'm going to be there next week, by the way.
Yeah,
You want me to stop by? I don't know if that's that place that you just do it, you just
I
pull
don't
in
think so.
with some Chick-fil-A, a frozen frosted lemonade for him.
It's interesting, actually. During his imprisonment, he became friendly with Ramzi Youssef and then Timothy McVeigh, who are the perpetrators of Ramzi Youssef,
Interesting.
the 93 World Trade Center bombings, and then Timothy McVeigh, obviously the Oklahoma City bombings. He also, he does still correspond with people. So people still send him letters and things. He's still alive.
Yes.
Of course, he's 76 years old. And some of his papers, his writings and things and his letters are part of the Labadie collection at the University of Michigan library. So they're in the special collections area. You can see his publications, his clippings, his letters and things that he's sent out over since his arrest with over 400 people. Those people's identities will remain sealed until 2049, actually. Although Ted tried to, I mean, they're sealed obviously for obvious reasons, right? But I mean, a lot of it you'd imagine is reporters and people trying to understand him more and things like that. But of course, also probably all these people get weirdos that write to them in prison and, fall in love and whatever. Maybe Juan Areola is still sending him letters. But this is the quote that he said. He was asked if he was afraid of losing his mind in prison. And he said, quote, No, what worries me is that I might, in a sense, adapt to this environment and come to be comfortable here and not resent it anymore. And I'm afraid that as my years go by that I may forget. I may begin to lose my memories of the mountains and the woods, and that's what really worries me. That I might lose those memories and lose that sense of contact with wild nature in general. But I am not afraid that you're going to break my spirit, end quote. So that is the end of the Unabomber series. It was a lot of stuff, Marie.
That is a lot of stuff. That's amazing. I wonder, like, one of my thoughts that goes through my head is like, we will have something like the Unabomber sometime again, and I just kind of wonder what it would be like, what that is, like, because the Unabomber was so unique and so different for the time, and was again just sort of this outlier. What would be the next? What's the next thing that would be like that? I think is really
interesting with it's very similar, I think, to. So there's this idea that goes around out there, and a lot of true crime shows have talked about it a lot. The idea being, are we in a period now where being, say, a serial killer is impossible because of the way that society has changed? Yeah, no, I don't think so, right?
No.
But the idea is that, you can't pick up hitchhikers anymore. People are not as anonymous as they once were. It's harder to be off the grid, yada, yada, all that kind of stuff. But I think though that really what we have seen is that just like Son of Sam was kind of the referential point for America in kind of the 70s on serial killers, Unabomber and then Oklahoma City were really the era of, they were kind of the crescendo moments, or I don't want to say the crescendo necessarily, of domestic terrorism. And then we kind of have been through a period where the threat has really been foreign terrorism. Obviously the World Trade Center, everything else. And I think, but I think that, honestly, I think Charlottesville will be looked at as one of those moments too. And I think that also we are going to look at, I don't think the bad times are done. You know what I mean with that kind of stuff? So I think, no, they never are. But I think
they never are.
We do go through these periods where it's kind of, super violence and then regular violence. So I think that we're probably, I don't know. I agree with you though. I think something will happen, but I wonder what it is. And
what's just so hard to wrap your mind around? Because I think that's one of the things that is quote unquote admirable or interesting about the Unabomber is the uniqueness of that story. And it's like, well, that story it's not unique in that it has happened before and it will happen again. But that's, you know what I mean? That's like, what is what iteration or permutation would that take? Would it be a cyber attack? Would it be, what does that look like? And that's what I kind of keep thinking about. And with that amount of difference and discipline and destructiveness comes together, it's inevitable, but it's also like, I don't know. It's to me. It's like that's almost what I would hope, and I'm sure that they are. Like our federal institutions are geared up to
well,
try
you know what
figure
else
out.
too, and so I think this kind of is off track on that thought, but this is something I wanted to bring up. Well, yeah, it's just a terrible thought. Yeah, what the hell, Marie? I think part of the reason why I think the Unabomber is so fascinating for so many people, and at least for me too, why it's fascinating, is he's like the evil scientist that gets his revenge in a way. You know what I mean? Like the idea of people thinking, like let's say like The Punisher, right? So Katie and I were watching The Punisher this afternoon on Netflix. And like, why does a character like that become popular? Because he's a terrible person. He's just a piece of crap, right? Even in the comics, he's so unlikable. Why does a character like that become so popular in the kind of viewpoint of the people? And it's because you think, or even say Dexter, right? You think that these people they're doing
Darth Vader.
They're doing terrible things, but Darth Vader's kind of the premier villain. These are like
but he's still doing terrible things.
But that's what I'm saying though. So Darth Vader it's easier to see him as a villain pure, right? Whereas the Punisher,
says someone who's not really a big, Star Wars fan. But that's okay. I'll get into it in a second.
Anyways, what I'm saying is you can see why they're doing the things they're doing. And there are times where you think that it keys into a type of power fulfillment fantasy that I think everyone has, right? Everyone who is smart and not necessarily strong has had a bully or somebody, punch you in the face or, break your glasses or whatever. And you've thought, well, you're big and strong, but I'm smart and I'm going to think of something that I'm going to get you with how smart I am, right? It's like the Riddler in Batman. Why is the Riddler such a fascinating character? It's because he's using his brain
Intellect.
to attack and hurt Batman.
Right.
He could never beat Batman in a fight, but he can create a riddle or a clue or some kind of machine or something to stump and then humiliate Batman.
Right.
And so I think for a lot of people, that's kind of what the Unabomber represents, as well as being that kind of idea again of that going back to nature. A lot of us see technology as being bad, as being not inherently good as we've been told it is. And I think
he's a vigilante, right? It's what people think. He's a vigilante.
Yes.
That type of thing. Yeah. I think the thing that seems, if I look at it, is that's interesting is that amount of control, that amount of discipline, that amount of being able to focus on something, on this very singular level for so long, but that's what you achieve. That's your achieving. You know what I mean? There's nothing that is auxiliary in his life, right? There's nothing that's a luxury. There's nothing that everything is faced to that one point, and that's it. He's given up family. He's given up, comforts. He's given up, excuse my French, modern society. Anything.
I wonder though if in prison, like, I bet there are like weird situations though where he's like, he's walking back to his cell, or not, I'm sure he doesn't get allowed out of his cell normally, but I don't know, he's sitting there reading this philosophy or, reading Joseph Conrad for the 1000th time or whatever. And he hears something funny on TV and he'll kind of like chortle, he'll do like the, like the breathing out laugh thing. And then he kind of like looks around like, did anyone see me just laughing at the Big Bang Theory?
Right. You think he's laughing? Yeah, he's laughing at the Big Bang. He loves the Big Bang Theory.
I bet there are situations where, because he's in prison now, so I guarantee what else do you have but those, what else do you have in prison but the kind of technology kind of things to get your mind off of the terrible place you're in? So it's kind of a very fitting, I mean, it's a very fitting and I think a very well-deserved punishment. I don't think there's anything better than, I don't think there's anything that the victims can hope for more than the Unabomber in a concrete gray facility,
Agreed.
Anyways.
Agreed. Away from nature, which is almost punishment enough. Well, not to the families, but to me, that's at least a fitting part of it.
And that's the end. So, dear listeners, thank you so much for listening to this episode. It was 2 hours long, so this is a hell of an episode.
Oh my God. What?
We've done, Marie, now 5 hours on the Unabomber, maybe 6.
Holy smokes, that's manifesto length.
Amazing.
We're on a watch list.
Listeners, if you enjoy these long form series, please let us know. This one took a lot of research and we're super proud of it. And yeah. As always, this is a Damn It Chippy Productions, all rights reserved, and all that stuff. So, Marie.
Good night.
As always, it's been a pleasure. Good night. Thank you again, dear listeners, for listening to the Mad Scientist podcast. I have been your host, Chris Cogswell, joined by my co-host,
Marie Mayhew.
If you'd like to contact the show, please send us an email at themadscientistpodcast@gmail.com. That's all one word. You can also follow us on Twitter at Mad Scientist Pod or at Team Giant Squid for Marie. And of course, you can see us on Facebook, on Instagram, and all over the internet as the Mad Scientist Podcast. And again, our logo is the one with the pumpkin head, so it's easy to see.
Mm-hmm.
If you've enjoyed the show tonight, please consider supporting us on Patreon, where the money that you give to us will help us to promote this show further, to make it better, and just to spend more time making it.
Because we love doing that.
We do love doing that. Our logo was designed by Carrie Shaheen. Our web design is done by Desdemona Howard.
Woohoo!
And our sound design is done by Jake Cardinal. Thanks again for listening.
Thank you. This has been a Damn It Chippy production.